But it goes without saying that no such solution can be achieved if Hamas and Hezbollah continue to call the shots. It is a pleasure and an honor to have the opportunity to share a few thoughts with such a distinguished audience. I also believe that I may have brought Cyprus weather with me. It's not something that I expected to find in Berlin this time of the year. But even more importantly, I believe that it is our shared responsibility to facilitate dialogue and to raise awareness and to attempt to understand how we can move forwards. Before anything else, let me state the obvious, that October 7th will be a day that will remain in infamy. The Hamas attack was brutal. It has once again thrown the Middle East into turmoil and has led to pain and hardship for the Palestinian people. But these attacks should not have come as a surprise, because Hamas and Hezbollah and their likes had been gaining strength for years. Their intentions were equally clear. They had constructed this vast underground network of tunnels, paid in part by international aid that was supposed to serve other needs. Their missile launch sites were placed next to hospitals and schools. They were able to move their money quite freely through the banking systems of countries which are considered friends and allies of the West. They were getting ready. Ladies and gentlemen, for sure, I consider some of the latest ideas regarding the evacuation of Gaza so that it can be turned into a Riviera as simply outrageous. But why? Why did we not consider the fact that Gaza had been turned into a staging ground for Hamas as equally outrageous? Why did we pretend not to see? And how could we conceivably talk of permanent diplomatic solutions when such were the developments taking place on the ground? What is even more concerning is the broader state of affairs, whereby both state and the non-state actors appear ready to use force in a direct challenge to the international order and the values of freedom and the liberal democracy, which I fear we have been taking for granted. Let us not forget that it was exactly 3 years ago when Putin launched his latest attack, believing he could wipe Ukraine from the map in a matter of days. In all these cases, I am afraid that the West may have erred, inadvertently allowing autocrats and extremists to believe that it was no longer able or willing to stand up for its values and interests. Putin may have been led to believe that the West was too weak and preoccupied to stand in his way. Others may have been led to believe that the West needs them more than they need the West. Hamas and other Islamic fundamentalists may have been led to believe that Western indulgence would allow them a free hand. So my main point is that Europe should wake up, especially now when the messages from across the Atlantic are what they are. The EU should comprehend that it can no longer remain an economic giant, but a geopolitical dwarf, including when it comes to the Middle East. We should stop believing that developments in the southern shores of the Mediterranean and the Middle East do not affect us. We cannot watch idly when one state after the other in that troubled region becomes a failed state. There can be no safety, no stability, and no prospect for diplomatic solutions in a region full of failed states. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand that international politics, like all politics, cannot be conducted in terms of black and white, and that idealism cannot ignore the dictates of realism. But I am suggesting that the truly realist and pragmatic approach, the one that serves our core interests, is the one which puts European indulgence and indifference aside. This means that Europe must become a much more effective foreign policy actor with enhanced security and defense capabilities of its own. Europe needs to become more engaged in the East Med and the Middle East, supporting moderate powers, facilitating the normalization of relations, including through a revival of the Abraham Accords process, and taking a firm stance against forces that directly or indirectly are destabilizing the region. It should also increase the provision of aid, ensuring, however, that this is conditional on reforms in education so that hatred is excluded and reconciliation is encouraged. Ladies and gentlemen, in any case, much depends on Israel itself. Let me clearly state that I understand and accept that Israel needs a restored sense of security and deterrence. Israel's survival over the years has been dependent on an effective deterrence. But at the same time, speaking as a friend of Israel, I want to point out that the military solution alone will not work. Israel must also win the peace. It must find the strength not only to defend itself against its enemies, but also to create the conditions that will allow it to talk to its enemies. And I will quote Moshe Dayan, this hardened Israeli military leader, who said that if you want to make peace, you don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies. Ladies and gentlemen, a two-state solution is the only solution. But it goes without saying that no such solution can be achieved if Hamas and Hezbollah continue to call the shots. No two-state solution can be accepted if it does not contain a full, unreserved and genuine recognition of Israel's right to exist as a homeland for the Jewish people. And this means that the chant from the river to the sea is unacceptable. A European vision for the region should include a stable and safe Israel with a vibrant economy and a free society which will continue to be a strategic partner for Europe, including Cyprus, its immediate European neighbor. But it should also include a free, independent, democratic Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank that will be able to care for the prosperity of its people under conditions of safety, peace, and moderation. I know that for now this may be more of an aspiration than a real prospect, but it is a prospect worth fighting for. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.